Okay? What did most anti-federalists want added to the Constitution? Ella. A Bill of Rights. What was another problem with the Constitution? That's another problem. How long are you elected in the Senate? Anybody remember? How long are you elected? Good. 6 years. House? Anybody? Call out. 2. Most states you were elected to a 1-year term. Now you're electing somebody for 6 years and 2 years. Electing a president for 4 years. People in the colonies weren't used to that. Okay? Who was the first to sign the Declaration of Independence? Evelyn. John Hancock. He was the president of the Continental Congress, and that was an appointed position. But it didn't mean he was going to have that authority for any period of time. Now you're electing someone for 4 years? That's a long time. So that's another argument that was against this Constitution. Others felt that you should have some religious requirements to be elected. Obviously, we don't require that, do we? But some felt we should. Good, moral, strong character. Aiden. So we're going to elect you. Must pass tests to be elected. You up for it, Georgia? Might get to the point where you say, who wants it that bad? But there were definitely major arguments. The biggest argument, though, as you are very familiar, is between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. And, of course, we know that and saw that on John Green's video right there. Okay, quick review. Let's read the screen there. Maggie, please.
Patrick Henry turned down an invitation to the Constitutional Convention because Patrick Henry, a leading figure in the American Revolution, decided not to be a delegate because, as he later revealed, he was small enough.
Was he a Federalist or Anti-Federalist? What do you think? Anti-Federalist. Okay, moving right along. Ella, please.
President of the Constitutional Convention.
And give us a name. Who's that guy in the middle? Help, Jesse. George Washington, yes. And of course, we mentioned he added prestige to the proceedings. People trusted it a lot more knowing he was there. Okay? The fact that he was there sent a message that we can trust the proceedings, though there were still a lot of people that doubted. Why? Did anybody get that far in the Liberty video? What was the first vote they took when they wrote the Constitution? Did you get that far yet? The very first vote they took was to keep the meeting secret. So they're sitting in a room in Philadelphia with the windows closed, blinds drawn, and they're not telling anybody anything about what's going on in there. What message does that send to you, Jesse?
Not a good one.
Not a good one, right. Someday you'll be a parent, and let me tell you, when it all starts getting quiet, you better start wondering what's going on over there. Mm-hmm. So the Anti-Federalists, moving right along. Sarah.
The Anti-Federalists argued that the Constitution would put an end to individual liberty. What did they want added to the Constitution? A Bill of Rights.
Moving right along. Compromise. Amy.
The Constitution has been called a bundle of compromises. Great compromise on political representation.
Anybody remember who wanted the bicameral legislature? Who wanted it? Ella. John Adams, yes. One part would be represented by population. Which one's that? Gracie? The answer is in the question. Represented. Yep. And the other one would have equal representation. Which one's that? Aiden? Evelyn, help. The Senate, yes. So people were happy with that because the big states would not overrule the small states in the Senate, and the bigger states would have a bigger proportion representation in the House. Now, I want you to understand that doesn't mean smaller states were just like, yeah, okay, they can have more in the House, but it was a compromise. Okay. 3/5 compromise, and that was how slaves were counted in the South. Okay. 3/5 compromise. How many representatives make up the House of Representatives? 435, yes. And remember the answer to that question? Let's see if Aiden can answer it. Just because you weren't here. If you don't want to, it's okay. But this state has one representative in Congress and has sent a grand total of 4 men to fill the seat. You want to try? If you don't, it's okay. Amy? Alaska, yes. And the catch there would be only 4 people have ever been representatives because it's a new state. Well, fairly new. The executive branch. Why was this branch difficult to establish? Why is it difficult? Go ahead.
Tyranny.
No tyranny. You're giving one person a lot of power. What are the 3 parts? I'll rattle it off.
President, Vice President.
Go to page 14 of your handout, please. Lights, if you would. The other light, please. Okay, 14 at the bottom. Issue number 3. Let's take a look at this. The issue number 3 that had to be debated, discussed, and figured out. Issue number 3. Will the new constitutional government create an aristocracy power in the presidency? Maggie, will you start us, please? With the no, says Alexander Hamilton.
No, that was Alexander. There is no comparison between the intended power of the president and the actual power of the British sovereign. The president of the United States would be an officer elected by the people for 4 years. The king of Great Britain is the perpetual and hereditary prince. What Andrew shall give to those who would us, judging still unlikely unto each other. The thing that ought to be given to those who shall less than the whole power of which would be in the hands of the elected and periodical servants of the people is an aristocracy, a monarchy, and
Yes, says George Clinton. Ella, please.
Yes, anti-federalist George Clinton of New York. Wherein does this president invest with power and essentially declared from the King of Great Britain, save as to the name, the creation, nobility, and some immaterial influence. The safety of the people of the Republic depends on the share or proportion of the government, but experience ought to teach you that when a man is at the head of an elected government, invested with great powers and interested in his re-election, appointments will be made by which means an imperfect aristocracy bordering on monarchy may be established.
Okay. And let's take a look while we're in the handout. Let's go over to 15 there. Does the proposed Constitution protect the people's liberty? Okay, let's take a look. Jesse, please.
Yes, Federalist Alexander Hamilton. Here in strictness, the people surrender nothing, and as they retain everything they have, no need of particular reservations. Bill of Rights, in the sense to the extent in which they are contended for, are not only unnecessary in the proposed Constitution, but would even be dangerous. Why declare that things not be done which there is no power to do? The truth is that the Constitution is itself, in every rational sense and to every useful purpose, a Bill of Rights.
And let's look at the no part. Anti-Federalist George Mason. Sarah.
There is no declaration of rights, and the laws of the general government being paramount to the laws and constitution of several states. The declaration of rights and separation of states are no security, nor are the people secure even in the enjoyment of the benefit of common law, which stands here upon no other foundations than its having been adopted by the respective acts forming the Constitution of the several states.
Now, to be clear, anti-federalist is a misnomer in the sense that you don't want to think anti-federalists were against the Constitution. They were in favor of a constitution, but just not this constitution. And the big battle was over the Bill of Rights, but that wasn't the only thing. Again, there were issues about terms and term limits, and that's the question that comes up a lot. Should you have term limits for congressmen and women? Well, we don't. We also don't have term limits for the Supreme Court. Now we do for the president, but that's it of the three branches. Okay, so that was another bone of contention, so to speak. All right. Okay, and number 3 would be the judicial branch, the court system, and the Supreme Court is established. Although they didn't have a whole lot of power, but they're going to get that power. We'll talk about that later as we get into a very important court case called Marbury versus Madison. Talk about that another time, though. So the third part is the judicial branch, and you are familiar with this. Okay, Supreme Court established, and that goes right on down the line. You go from the Supreme Court to the Court of Appeals to the district courts to the state courts, right down to the local magistrates. Okay, and that's the court system. Okay, and we know the answer to this one. There's an easy one for us. Gracie, what's the answer? What system is established with neither branch more power than the other? Help, Amy. Checks and balances. The best I could do. See that? Checks, balance. The executive cannot overrule the legislature. The legislature cannot pass laws that are unconstitutional. The president can be impeached by the legislature. We are familiar with that, aren't we? It's happened a lot lately. Okay, supporters were called Federalists. Take a look at that map. I thought that was kind of interesting. Look at where the Federalists are and where the Anti-Federalists are. The Federalists mostly tended to be in metropolitan areas, whereas Anti-Federalists were more out in the countryside, in the rural. And that is going to play a role with Jefferson, of course, who is a big agrarian. Yes, we'll talk about that. Okay, so how many states had to vote yes, everybody? 9. Okay. What did the Anti-Federalists want? A Bill of Rights was the big thing. Okay, let's just read through that real quick. Aiden, go.
What do the Anti-Federalists want? The Bill of Rights. Even though the Bill of Rights is said to protect people's rights, it has been said that it limits citizens' rights, but it also limits the amount of power of the government of the people.
So you have to look at it this way. This is another twist to it. Some felt that if you write down every single right you have, that actually limits your rights. Okay? Now, think about it. We're going to write 10 Bill of Rights. This is what you're allowed to do, and that's it. So some of the Federalists thought that actually limits your rights. Okay? Because once it's written down, now that's all you're allowed to do. And that's it. No more. Where in the Bill of Rights does it say you have the right to breathe?
I'm gonna say that the 9th can cover that.
The 9th can cover that. Okay. Very animated group. All right, let's read through this. Evelyn, please.
Thomas Jefferson, who was serving in Paris as ambassador to France, received a copy of the Constitution and was anxious to share his thoughts with Madison. Jefferson's letter objected to the omission of a Bill of Rights, providing clearly for freedom of religion, freedom of the press, protection against standing armies.
And I do want you to be aware that Thomas Jefferson was in favor of a Bill of Rights. Okay? He was in favor of a Bill of Rights. And again, I want to point out the irony that James Madison was the one that said we don't need a Bill of Rights, and he's the one that wrote it. Okay? So Jefferson was in favor of the Bill of Rights. Okay, back to Patrick Henry, who we've talked about before. Let's take a look at this. Georgia, please.
The spectacular orator
Yep.
Henry thundered in response. The rights of conscience, of trial by jury, liberty of the press, all your immunities and franchises, all pretensions to human rights and privileges are rendered insecure if not lost.
Can anybody answer the first question? Why didn't he participate in the Constitutional Convention? Evelyn.
I think, is this the guy who smelled a rat? Smelled a rat.
And what does that mean? Obviously, I know what you're getting at.
He didn't trust it.
Didn't trust it, yes. And what was his famous quote? Go ahead.
Give me liberty or give me death.
Yes. Or you could say the other one. Go ahead, Sarah, say it.
I smell a rat.
Very good. Okay. Marathon of a slide. I understand all that. Let's play pretend. And we're going to pretend we're reading from a textbook. So instead, we're just going to read off the screen. All right. So let's take a look at this. Ella, you can take the first two paragraphs and then pass it off to Jesse or read more, whatever you want to do. Okay.
The anti-federalists who generally oppose ratification because they believe that the Constitution conferred too much power on the federal government supported a Bill of Rights to serve as an additional constraint against
Despotism, which means a strong monarchy.
The Federalists contended that a Bill of Rights was unnecessary because, in their view, the federal government possessed only limited powers that were expressly delegated to it by the Constitution. They believed that all powers not constitutionally delegated to the federal government were inherently reserved to the people and the states. Nowhere in the Constitution, the Federalists pointed out, is the federal government given the power to trample on individual liberties. The Federalists feared that if the Constitution were to include a Bill of Rights that protected certain liberties from government interference would be drawn that the federal government could exercise an implied power to regulate such liberties. Alexander Hamilton, one of the leading Federalists, articulated this concern in the Federalist number 84. Why should a Bill of Rights, Hamilton asked, declare that things shall not be done which there is no power to do? For instance, Hamilton said it was unnecessary for a Bill of Rights to protect the freedom of the press when the federal government is not granted the power to regulate the press. A provision against restraining the liberty of the press, Hamilton said, affords the clear implication that a power to prescribe proper regulations concerning it was intended to be vested in the national government. The Federalists were also concerned that any constitution
Enumeration.
of liberties might imply that other rights not enumerated by the Constitution would be surrendered to the government.
Now, take a look at that last part there. And I know it's enumerated and we don't use those words every day, but what it means is that rights are specifically, or powers that are specifically listed. Okay, and here's the question, and the question that's going to come up later in government is, it doesn't say in the Constitution who has the power to do something. So can you do something and say, well, it's an implied power? What's interesting about this is, and I'll give you a great example, Thomas Jefferson was against the government doing anything that was not in the Constitution. And he said it must be written down, and if it's not written down, then you can't do it. And he was very critical of anything the government tried to do if it wasn't there. Now, when Thomas Jefferson decides he's going to buy Louisiana, there's nothing in the Constitution that gives the president the power to buy land. So Jefferson's argument is, okay, maybe the Constitution doesn't say I can do it, but it also doesn't say I can't. Great example. I was talking to a student, not in your class, don't even try to figure out who I'm talking about, who said that they were grounded and weren't allowed to drive. They were not allowed to drive the car because mom and dad said you're not driving the car. You know what the kid did? Borrowed somebody else's. Well, they didn't say I can't borrow somebody else's. You see why that might have been implied maybe by the parents? Even though they didn't actually say it, it was implied. And that's what I want you to understand. With government, the same thing. Okay, continuing. Jesse, please.
A Bill of Rights, they feared, would quickly become the exclusive means by which the American people could secure their freedom and stave off tyranny. Federalist James Madison argued that any attempt to enumerate fundamental liberties would be incomplete and might imperil other freedoms not listed. A positive declaration of some essential rights could not be attained in the requisite latitude.
Yep.
Madison said, if an enumeration be made of all our rights, he would. Very.
Yep.
Will it not be implied that everything omitted is given to the general government? Anti-Federalists and others who supported a Bill of Rights attempted to mollify the Federalist concerns with three counter-arguments. First, the Anti-Federalists underscored the fact that the Constitution guarantees certain liberties even without a Bill of Rights. For example, Article 1 of the Constitution prohibits Congress from suspending the writ
Habeas corpus. Yep.
habeas corpus and from passing bills of attainder
Yep.
and ex post facto laws. If these
Which is basically what that means is your right to have a trial, which is your Sixth Amendment, fair and speedy trial. Go ahead.
If these liberties could be enumerated without endangering other unenumerated liberties, anti-federalist reason additional liberties, such as freedom of the press and religion, could be safeguarded in the Bill of Rights. Second, while acknowledging that it would be impossible to enumerate every human liberty imaginable, supporters of a Bill of Rights maintain that this obstacle should not impede the framers from establishing constitutional protection for certain essential liberties. Thomas Jefferson, responding to Madison's claim that no Bill of Rights could ever be exhaustive, commented that half a loaf is better than no loaf. Wait, half a loaf is better than no bread. If we cannot secure all of our rights, let us secure what we can.
And that's what Jefferson was arguing. Okay, let's take a look at this. Amy.
Third, anti-federalists argued that if there was a genuine risk that naming certain liberties would imperil others, then an additional constitutional amendment should be drafted to offer protection for all liberties not mentioned in the Bill of Rights. Such an amendment, the anti-federalists argued, would protect those liberties that might fall through the cracks of written constitutional provisions. This idea became the Ninth Amendment. Unlike every other provision contained in the Bill of Rights, the Ninth Amendment had no predecessor in English law. It stemmed solely from the genius of those who framed and ratified the Constitution. Ironically, Madison, who opposed the Bill of Rights in 1787, was the chief architect of the Ninth Amendment during the First Congress in 1789.
Does anybody know what the Ninth Amendment is? Amy.
Rights not specifically listed may still be provided.
Bingo. Yes. Okay, so the Bill of Rights. All right, the Bill of Rights. The Ninth Amendment, basically what that says is you have rights even if they are not listed in the Constitution. So this was kind of a catch-all for everything. All right, go to Canvas there. Take a minute and play the Quizlet game. For the test, you do have to know amendments 1 through 10, and I will go over them a little more clearly tomorrow. But play Quizlet for a minute. Which I think that's the first one that I wrote when we get to it in class. Yep, there you go. Now, 13 and 19 will not be on there, although 13th Amendment ended slavery and the 19th guaranteed women the right to vote. But it's amendments 1 through 10, the Bill of Rights.
Assignments that are due tomorrow.